And throughout all of Black History Month, we are featuring our big impact pioneers each day on Big Ten Today. And it is my honor, my pleasure, my privilege to now have the man himself, Darryl Hill, who was an impact and a barrier breaker in a variety of different ways throughout his athletic endeavors. Darryl, thank you so much for being with me here. And thinking about you growing up in the D.C. area back in the 40s, football wasn't the most popular sport in the country back then like it is now. I'm wondering, who were some of the athletes as a youngster that you grew up maybe hoping to emulate?
Well, a lot of great athletes came out of Washington, D.C. In the football genre. Some of my contemporaries were the great Willie Wood, who's, in the Hall of Fame for safety at Packers with the Green Bay Packers. And the great basketball players like Elgin Baylor and Dave Bing, who I had the veritable questionable pleasure of getting my eyes shot out by when we were in high school. Somebody said, "Go check him." I said, "Oh, he's a little boy, he's in the 10th grade. I was a senior. Just the final score was our team 28, David Bing 30. DC was loaded with athletes. Football was popular, and my high school won the city championship when I was a senior, which was a big deal back in the day. So here we are 99 years later.
And you come from a long line of high achievers in your family. Your dad, Kermit, owned one of the largest Black-owned transportation trucking companies for a number of years there. Your great-grandfather was the first minority who was hired by the D.C. Fire Department many years ago. In what ways did their influence shape the type of achievement that you were willing to pursue?
Well, I think it was sort of inherited and subtly inherited. I didn't have in my mind that I was going to try to emulate my forefathers or forebears. It just so happened that they did have this history. Both of my grandfathers were groundbreakers. Not only my great-grandfather, who was the first person of color with the Washington, D.C. Fire Department, which was a big deal back in 1910. He was actually a Native American, but he was the first person of color to join. No men in my family have ever had a job. So both grandfathers on either side, mother and father's side, were businessmen, and my father, of course, continued that. My brother's a businessman. Even my son has a little small business going on now. So it must be in the blood, I guess.
And in the initial stages of your football journey, you integrated, from a football perspective, integrated your high school program. You integrated the Naval Academy, being the first African-American player at the Naval Academy. And that was even before you ended up becoming a Maryland Terrapin. But just focusing for a moment on those initial couple of stops, were you already recognizing a level of impact in being a barrier breaker at those destinations?
Not at the high school level necessarily. I was the first, at Gonzaga High School, where, by the way, the great Caleb Williams played, hoping that our Washington team was able to get him in the draft. That's an aside. But so high school wasn't that big a deal. I grew up, I can remember when we played the high school championship game. We played against the public school champions, in which the school, Eastern High School, was basically in my neighborhood. So all the guys on the team were friends, and they used to rag on me, not derogatory, just kind of jerking my chain from time to time and saying, "Oh, you over at Gonzaga, you playing with those white dudes." And then so after I ran the winning touchdown with a minute to go in the game to win the city championship, I walked out to my friends on the other side. I said, "Yeah, and those white dudes can block too, can't they?"
So let's move on to your time in joining up with the Terrapins. And Lee Corso was an assistant coach at Maryland at the time, and you were moving on from the Naval Academy. What was that conversation like to sort of make the decision of whether or not you were going to go and integrate football, not only for Maryland, but every program south of the Mason-Dixon line had not allowed a black player up to that point?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting point. You know, people say first in the ACC, first in football. I was the first African American to receive a varsity athletic scholarship to play varsity sports at any major college below the Mason-Dixon line. That was the ACC, SEC, and the Midwest Conference, which is now the Big Eight, I guess. So it would the fact of giving me a scholarship was a big deal. That was sort of like an unofficial barrier, and not just football. You know, I was the first one to get a scholarship in any sport. So sort of like the Jackie Robinson of college sports in a certain degree. And when I came to Maryland, when I got to Navy and Corso tried to recruit me, he said, well, don't you want to come to Maryland? And I said, well, Coach, you must be forgetting, you know, where Maryland is located and what conference it plays in. And he said, well, that's just the point. We think it's time that those antiquated laws, unofficial rules are taken down. And you're the right guy. I said, well, right guy or not, I said, Coach, I want to come to college and, you know, have a normal life and be a college student and, you know, have fun and drink beer and chase around the girls and, you know, do what students do. And then I said, look, Coach, I'm not trying to be Jackie Robinson here. So he looked at me. He said, that was the problem. I said, what do you mean, Coach? And he said, you must be scared. Well, he pressed the right button when he did that. And, you know, the rest is history. I signed and went to Maryland, and Corso was my coach and mentor through this process. You know, and it was after the fact that dawned on me what had happened. There was 2 full years had passed. They waited till I was a senior before another black was offered an athletic scholarship anywhere in the country, especially at the ACC and even at Maryland. So the next black to enter the league, Billy Jones, who his name was honored with me on the building, was a basketball player, but I was a senior when Billy Jones came on. So what it turned out to be, it looked like they were waiting to see what was going to happen. And I guess maybe looking back on it, if I fumbled and bumbled or dropped the ball or did something egregious, you know, Corso told me later, he said it might have strung it out another few years. So that was sort of a pressure that I didn't know about so much that I know about now.
And I would urge everyone to take a look. I mean, your stories are well documented, just the level of bravery that your mother showed in not only home environments, but certainly some of the road environments you played in back then. No, I do want to make sure I ask you as well, though, because you mentioned the word history a moment ago. You were there in person for the March on Washington. You were there as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his I Have a Dream speech. Take us back to that time. What was it like to be there witnessing that history?
Well, that was very exciting, you know, compared to what's going on now, you know, with all the conflict and hatred that's flying around the country. You know, blacks had a purpose and a goal, and, you know, led by Dr. King and others. And it was an exciting time to be there and to be a part of this goal, you know. And I can recall leader of Black leadership group called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, otherwise known as SNCC. And it was headed up by Stokely Carmichael and H. Rap Brown. They were both students at Howard. And they said to me, we'd like you to lead some protests out at College Park. You know, they was, at that time, they would sit in the executive's offices, president. They wanted me to stage a sit-in at the president's office at the University of Maryland. And I kind of said, no, I don't have time to be engaged in that kind of activity. And so Rap Brown, who had kind of a sharp tongue, kind of said, And I got angry with him, and I had a few words, and finally Stokely said, look, his job is to integrate college sports. Other people can sit in the president's office. That's not what he's here for. And so that was, the end of that kind of story. And the same thing happened in Navy. When I was at Navy, I was the first African-American to play any varsity sport at any military academy, as far as I know. Certainly football, an early player in football at Navy. And this is a time when Navy was flying fairly high. In fact, one day, as we were both plebes at Navy, and I first couple of days of practice, and I saw this other freshman plebe running and throwing bullets on the dead run. And I said, who are you? And he said, my name is Roger. I said, well, Roger, you could play. What's your last name? He said, Starback. I said, well, you're a pretty good player. And he said, yeah, well, I noticed you ain't dropping too many of those passes I'm throwing to you. So maybe you and I can hook up, So Roger and I were there together, and both of us at one time or another thought about leaving the academy. Roger opted to stay, and I left, obviously. And but at Navy, there was no pressure there. I didn't get any harassment from any of the midshipmen, and I got to say, at Maryland, my team was fully behind me in everything I did. And they, for example, they had a meeting. I had a doctor's appointment, which they knew about. And while I was at the doctor's appointment, they had a team meeting without me. And basically the gist of that meeting was, all right, we're going down south, and we're going to stay at the Hilton and other known hotels, and blacks aren't allowed to stay. And the team voted unanimously, he don't stay, we don't stay. Which
Wow.
was more, they bit off more than they thought when they did, because we wound up having to stay in little strip motels, out in the country. They weren't happy with it.
Incredible.
But they stood with me.
Yeah.
And so
that is quite a journey, and a pioneer of Big Ten history, an encyclopedia of American history. Darryl Hill, thank you so much for your time today and for everything that you have meant to this conference, to the Maryland program, and everywhere else. Look forward to doing this again soon.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the time.